Greetings from Tokyo. This is Daisuke, and I hope all of you are doing very well today, my friends. Continuing with my discussion of the films of the great Italian filmmaker Dario Argento, today I'd like to talk to you about a very special film in his filmography. This is a film from 1996, and the title of the film is The Stendhal Syndrome. The Stendhal Syndrome is, as I said, a film from 1996, and it stars Asia Argento as a police detective named Anna Mani. This film is remarkable for many reasons. I think, without giving too much away, I would say that it's a film that deals with this very interesting way of dealing with art and paintings. This idea of the Stendhal syndrome, as it's discussed within the context of the film world that is being constructed here, is basically this illness or condition whereby the person who has this condition is so overcome by the power of the art that he or she feels like he is falling into the painting and being enveloped by the world of the painting. So this film's thematic premise, if you will, rests upon this idea of the main character having this condition, and whenever she is confronted by some powerful work of art, she feels compelled. And she can't help it. It just overwhelms her in a way that she doesn't have control. And she falls into the painting, she goes into the world of the painting, and she walks through the painting. Things like this happen throughout the film itself. And this creates a very unique, interesting, quite bizarre thematic thread that goes all the way through the film, starting from the very beginning and going all the way to the end of the film. And it's fascinating because for the first time we see Argento really work with this idea of first-person perspective, and this idea of a real kind of psychological trauma, one could describe it that way, or maybe psychological condition that is like a 3D, all-encompassing, all-enveloping effect. The film itself tries to capture that in terms of visual special effects in order to suggest this idea of falling into the painting, and a use of computer graphics, which I think at the time, in the late 90s, I think were quite revolutionary. Now they're probably very dated, but they seem at the time to be very uniquely settled within this film. And around this, the context here, right, we have this idea of a police detective trying to find basically this really nasty piece of work, this rapist and killer of women. So this is the nature of the film, which is a sort of a police crime drama. But then it turns into this really interesting giallo, whereupon we have to figure out who the killer is when certain events of the narrative transpire. A very fascinating turn, and one that provides the whole general tapestry or canvas to the film, which is quite nasty in many places. In many places we're dealing with pretty disgusting scenes of torture and rape, and we are also dealing with really unsettling images and quite frightening scenarios that are suggested. We're also dealing with a film that has certain elements that we've seen in past Argento films. For example, we've seen in the past how Argento likes to deal with this idea of art and the power of art, and how art can be both overwhelming and perhaps even dangerous, right? Go back to The Bird with the Crystal Plumage. We've seen this idea of art actually attacking the main character and falling on the main character, or we see this idea of Deep Red, this idea of a corridor of pictures, and this idea of a portrait not being what it was, or something not quite right. So there's something to do with a detail about art, and there are certain landscapes, architectural landscapes in Tenebrae that suggest this notion of art. And there's also a very interesting sculpture, if you recall, in Tenebrae that comes in at a very key moment of the film. Well, here we have art on display, but really in the forefront. Here we have art being the thing that is the center of the psychological condition of our main character, Anna Manny. And it is a fascinating development of an Argento theme that we have seen developed thus far. We also have a very peculiar use of the giallo format. And I don't want to say too much lest I spoil it, but there are elements here that I think are quite unexpected and that are really unique in the Argento giallo canon, in the sense that we have a certain setup, and I think the setup in and of itself, I'm talking about the first half of this film, doesn't necessarily provide an easy setup for a giallo mystery. In other words, there isn't a set of characters from which we are to guess who is the killer, right? It's not like an Agatha Christie type of mystery. It's a brutal, like torture sort of film, and it's quite disturbing in many respects. But then the film then turns into this sort of giallo film where you're realizing who the killer could be, which we have to guess who the killer is in the scenario that's set up. And it's a fascinating way that Argento twists this narrative from a film that starts out as this pretty odd psychological drama that turns very quickly and on a nasty turn into this torture film, this police crime drama that centers on a torture rape scenario, and then it swerves into this giallo scenario, and it's quite a bumpy ride with twists and turns. And I think that is a perfect image to describe this film, because again, it's confusing, and it's perfect too because the psychological condition, the Stendhal syndrome, is supposed to be confusing. The world disappears around us and we don't know where we are, and we are enveloped in something that is new and foreign and quite alien to us. And I think that's the kind of feeling of confusion that Argento is, I think, purposely aiming for. And if that's the case, then I think he succeeds quite masterfully. The film, as I say, is quite disturbing in many respects, and I think that has to do with the scenes of rape and murder, which I think are, for whatever reason, are much nastier. They feel much nastier than previous films' killing scenes, right? So there have been some pretty nasty scenes in the past, in past Argento films, but for whatever reason, here they feel quite raw and very disturbing. And I think perhaps a lot of it has to do with the fact that we have Argento's own daughter, Asia, at the center of the victimization, which is, I think, quite disturbing on the one hand, but on the other hand, right, there is I mean, I don't know. I don't know what the relationship is between Dario Argento and Asia Argento. I'm not a student of their biographies and of their histories, but I have to assume that the two of them are, or at the time of the making of this film, they were working adults, and they both had their own careers. And Asia Argento, I understand at the time to have been a very famous film actress in Italy. So, and Dario Argento too, at the time, who was a very famous director in Italy as well as in Europe and in the United States. But so I have to assume that there was a certain understanding between the two of them, and especially since they were related by blood. All the same, it's quite disturbing to witness these scenes where her character Anna Mani is subjected to some pretty disgusting things. Now, granted, of course, a lot of it is staged. There's a lot of special effects and camera trickery going around. I understand that, but still, it is quite a difficult watch. And so I think that makes the early part of the film, on the one hand, quite nasty to watch, but I think that's done on purpose. And I don't like this film because it's nasty and it has these really vile elements to it. But I admire the film because I think it's trying to show us the nature of real psychological trauma that is premised upon physical torment and torture and real harrowing situations, and how one recovers, or how one can walk away from those situations and really build up one's life to the best that he or she can. And that's the kind of through line that I feel is going on here with the Stendhal syndrome. I mean, it's not the most probing psychological examination of this kind of trauma, mind you, and I completely acknowledge that. But still, I think there is something to that effect going on here, and that has a lot to do with the strength of character that Asia Argento gives to the character of Anna Mani, the main character here. Without a doubt, Asia Argento's performance here is magnetic, and it is staggeringly awesome, and I really find it to be a terrific performance. I have to say here again that, as I think I mentioned in my discussion of the film Trauma, with the recent developments that have taken place with respect to Asia Argento and her life, it's sometimes very difficult to know how to watch films after you know what transpires in a particular actor or director's real life, right? So I think the same could be said of Asia Argento films going forward. But I think, again, from my point of view, watching this film is not a direct endorsement of Asia Argento's life, or what she has done, or what she has she has been alleged to have done. I think because there are many other artists that are working on this film, so there is a sense that you're watching something, a work of art, or a work that has been made by many hands, not just one. And also, we are talking about a performance, and we're not talking about an evaluation of a person's life or character. And that's a completely different discussion, I think, to a discussion regarding a film. So, and not to say that those discussions are completely isolated from each other. I understand that there are instances when you can have discussions where they are interlinked. But here I would like to say that my feelings about Asia Argento's performance are strictly confined to this film. And within the limits of this film, I think she gives a magnificent performance, undeniably magnificent. So this is the Stendhal syndrome. And I think from my point of view, I don't know where it stands yet, because it is still somewhat new from my point of view. It's certainly not of the same level as the earlier classics, but there is much complexity and therefore much psychological richness. So much so that I think it deserves attention, and I think it deserves a lot of critical attention, and I think it deserves to be seen, as long as you have a strong stomach for it, of course. I think it deserves to be seen and evaluated as such. I don't claim it to be the greatest film ever made. I don't claim it to be the greatest Italian horror film ever made. But I do think it is something that is, on the one hand, filled with Argento touches, but on the other hand, it swerves and twists and turns in a way that I think can be said to be something unique in the Argento canon. So, on that score alone, it is certainly worth a look, in my opinion. And again, if you are wary of violent scenes, this is probably not the best film to watch. But if you can appreciate the kind of violence that's being depicted as being depictions of violence done in a way that is within the confines of this cinematic expression, then I think you might potentially find this film to be intriguing, and maybe it might have something for you in terms of a discussion of recovery after trauma, or a discussion of the notions of how to present a narrative that is very obviously divided into multiple parts. Okay, my friends, so that is my discussion of the film, The Stendhal Syndrome. What do you think of this film? Do you like this film? Do you not like this film? Are you lukewarm? Whatever the case may be, if you have any comments, I would love to hear them. And if you wouldn't mind leaving them below in the comment section, I'd love to have a discussion with you. And we can talk, you and I, about this very peculiar film in Argento's canon. Okay, my friends, so thank you very much for watching. And until we meet again, please be happy and healthy and well. And please, please, please keep on watching a lot of great, great movies. Take care, my friends. Cheers.